Good morning to all of you tuning in this morning. I am Dr. Jason Bolton, Vice President of Community Partnerships and Admissions for the Help Group, and I will be moderating today's Ask the Experts webcast. A month ago, we held a webcast entitled Addressing the Mental Health Needs of People During the Pandemic. The webcast was a huge success with more than 1,100 registrants. While we were able to answer a few questions at the end of the webcast, we were not able to get to many of them that had been submitted at registration and during the webcast in the chat. The level of interest in the topic and the number of questions we received led us to inviting the expert panel back for an encore performance. Today, the panel will be available to field questions you had from last month or any others that may have come to you since then. We would like to welcome back all of you who joined us for that webcast or any of the others that we have provided during the COVID restrictions. If you did not attend last month's webcast, we are confident that the question and answers you will hear today will still be helpful. Please know that you can find this webcast and all of our previous ones at the Help Group's website. As COVID restrictions are now approaching a year in duration and the prospects of a return to more normal times remain unclear, many children, adolescents, and young adults are struggling with the pressures of isolation, uncertain future, and the myriads of loss due to the pandemic. We hope that you will leave this session better prepared for these times. Now I would like to reintroduce today's knowledgeable panel, who so graciously agreed to return to us today. Once again, we are happy to be joined by Dr. Christina Ortiz, Cheryl Hueso-Mishak, and Lori Owens. Dr. Christina Ortiz is a therapist and registered psychologist at the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center. She provides individual and family psychotherapy to adults, teens, and children affected by suicide and or mental illness. She also facilitates the teen survivors after suicide and adult survivor of suicide attempt support groups, and provides clinical trainings to community organizations, schools, and businesses, offering them a view of suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention from a clinical perspective. She was a volunteer suicide crisis intervention counselor for D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for 3 years prior to beginning her graduate school and obtaining her doctorate in clinical psychology. Cheryl Hueso-Mishak earned her MSW with an emphasis in community partnership and program administration and is a licensed clinical social worker. She primarily works in the area of 0 to 5, trauma, and parent-child attachment. An integral part of the Help Group's outpatient CalWorks program, Cheryl is the intake coordinator and clinical supervisor for the Individual Placement and Support Services program. She oversees employment-related services for clients that are working to overcome personal challenges through therapeutic services in order to return to the workforce and maintain competitive employment. Cheryl is certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, the Incredible Years Parenting Program, and infant massage. Lori Owens is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the director of clinical services for North Hills Prep. Lori grew up in Southern California and has been working with children since high school. She received a BS in psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and later completed her MS in counseling psychology at Cal State Northridge. Lori is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has counseled children, adolescents, and families in a variety of settings. She has over 20 years experience working with youth facing a variety of issues such as trauma, depression, anxiety, identity issues, substance abuse, self-injurious behaviors, eating disorders, and the transition to adulthood. Now that you've heard a little bit about our presenters, we would like to know a little bit about you as well. You should now see a short poll pop up on your screen momentarily. If you could answer these questions, I'll give you just a couple minutes and we will continue. Just 3 quick questions here. We're about halfway done, it looks like. Let's give us a couple more seconds. The last few votes come in. Okay, thank you for that. Wow, we're about 50-50 split between those of you who were able to attend with us last month and those of you who are new today. But I'm sure that the way these questions will be phrased, you will get a lot out of today, even if you weren't here. We have about half of us are service providers, about a quarter are parents, and we have some teachers and some other folks. And I asked this question last month as well about how challenging COVID has been for you. The results actually look pretty similar, fairly challenging being about half of us. Some of us have been very challenged, about 1 in 5. People are feeling like they can make it through, and some folks are acknowledging that there are some silver linings to all of this. So I thank you very much. Just a reminder to clear that poll from your screen. You might have to X out in the top right-hand corner so that the poll is not in front of the faces of our panelists today. All right. We at the Help Group are honored that you have chosen to spend another hour with us. For those of you joining us for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about the Help Group. Among other social and mental health services, the Help Group operates 16 non-public schools in Los Angeles and Orange counties, serving students with autism spectrum disorders, learning disabilities, ADHD, developmental delays, and emotional challenges. We contract with more than 80 local education authorities to provide special education and related services to more than 1,300 students. Like many schools in the country, on March 19th, after local and state guidance, we pivoted our instructional practices to a distance learning and remote services delivery model and remain committed to best practices in addressing the needs of children and young adults during these times. Today, you will hear from 3 experts answering questions about the unique mental health needs of young people during the pandemic. I will be asking the panelists questions that were submitted during the last webcast. However, as we talk, you will still have the opportunity to submit questions using the chat button located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. After answering questions we curated from the last presentation, we may be able to get to some questions that were submitted today as well. So let's get started. Dr. Ortiz, I'm going to start with you. The question, I'm reading questions just as they came into us last month. How can young people be best supported during the pandemic if their home environment is chaotic, unsafe, or negatively impacting their mental health?
Right. So there are several things that we can do to support young people in a difficult or I would say unsafe, because that's what the question is, unsafe home environment. So first, if the young person is unsafe, maybe they're in a home where domestic violence is occurring or they're a victim of domestic violence, for example, then assessing risk and safety planning is essential. I would say safety is priority here. So that might mean collaboratively problem solving with them, how to get them to safety, or if they're a really young person, like a child, working with their parents or working with a caregiver who could get them to safety in both the short and the long term. If they're older young person, I guess if they're willing to get support, connect them to a domestic violence advocate, give them the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and that number that number is 800-799-7233. If their home environment, let's say, is safe but chaotic, I would work with them, try to explore what they can and can't change in the household, empower them, guide them to problem solve, like what they do have control over, to protect their mental health, because I imagine it's really affecting their whole well-being. So, for example, maybe creating a structure for themselves, a daily routine, identifying triggers, maybe being proactive about avoiding or at least reducing them, learning emotional regulation skills, distress tolerance skills, and these will just really help build their resilience. An essential distress tolerance skill, I'd say, is mindfulness, right? So mindfulness for an example of mindfulness might be really focused breathing techniques. And there are apps I recommend to clients all the time. There's Meditation Timer, Calm, and Headspace. I like Headspace because it kind of explains what mindfulness is. And so hopefully that answers that question.
Oh, that reminds me, Christina, today when you're going to hear answers to some questions and like Dr. Ortiz just did, they may mention some resources. And that's sometimes it's hard to get those written down as the person is talking. Christina mentioned a phone number. When we will curate all of those resources that are mentioned today, and when we put the recording of this on our webcast, on our webpage, there will also be a list of all of these resources. So don't feel like you have to take them all down. We will definitely provide them to you afterwards. So thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
Ms. Owens, how do we, again, I'm reading exactly as questions came into us, how do we help the youth in addressing their mental health needs when they do not want to take the initiative to take advantage of the resources being offered?
Okay, so that's a tough one and a common one too. I think, first of all, it kind of depends why you think the youth isn't taking the resources offered. What we see a lot with the students I work with is there's either a level of overwhelm so much that they're having difficulty accessing or even having the energy to access any resources. It may be just because it was suggested by you, a parent, and a lot of preteens and teenagers think anything that comes from parents is dumb. There's a lot of different reasons. So I would try to explore a little bit more why you think your child or your client is resistant. And then some interventions, I think the most importantly is to be present. If you're present, just doing things like hanging out with your child, or even doing hangout or doing rapport building activities in a therapeutic environment. Kids are more often to disclose things or ask for help kind of in non-direct ways. So if you're present and you can hear what they're concerned about, or you can add little bits of support. For families, do family activities that promote good mental health, like exercising together, maybe going for a walk or playing a game. Laughing is really helpful for all of our mental health. So watching, a funny movie together, or, telling each other jokes. I talked about in my presentation last month about gratitude, maybe helping kids reframe by looking at ways that they can be grateful, or some of the silver linings that some of you seem to have found, sharing those with the kids you either raise or work with. And then a lot of times with teenagers, and preteen too, it's maybe the message needs to not come from you. Maybe there's a trusted adult, an aunt, a trusted neighbor, or an older sibling that can kind of help support the child into getting more support, whether that's formal support, like therapeutic intervention, or doing things like Christina mentioned about mindfulness or exercise, or becoming less isolated.
Thank you, Lori.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl, maybe this is somehow somewhat related here. It asks specifically about what tools can I use in teletherapy? So this question is likely coming from a therapist. What tools can I use in teletherapy to help children with anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, yes, this time has been really difficult, but what it's really done is force a lot of people to be creative and to really develop tools to help with teletherapy. There is a lot of great websites, and as Dr. Bolton mentioned, we'll put those up for you, but a few I wanted to share. One of them is called Hopscotch. And this is really a website that's online, and it's gamified interventions that are developed specifically for therapists. You can use it in session, out of session. There's virtual positive reinforcement charts. You could assign homework assignments for the client. And all you really have to do is create an account, and you could also monitor the client's progress on here. NAMI, I know, has a lot of wonderful resources as well to help during this time. PBS Kids is another one that I've used. They have different kid videos, different games that, especially if you're using a platform like Zoom, for example, and you're able to share screen, you can share, videos and games with your clients. There's also this really great blog called the Playful Therapist blog, and they have a lot of wonderful resources developed. They have lists of books that you can use through teletherapy. For mindfulness, I suggest on YouTube, there's Cosmic Yoga for Kids. It's really wonderful. It takes different characters that the kids could relate most to, and it has them do yoga through, these characters, like Disney characters, for example. And another one is called Mind Heart. And Mind Heart has a lot of resources to really help children learn more about feelings during this time, as well as how to process them in a healthier way. So again, I know that that's a lot of information and a lot of resources, but we will put those up for you all so you can access them. And, even doing like a simple Google search on teletherapy resources or online resources to use with clients, something like that, will probably lead you to a lot of different links that you guys can use as well.
Cheryl, real quick, someone in the chat said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the first app you mentioned. Do you remember what?
Yes, it's called Hopscotch, TCH, sorry. And like I said, even if you Google that, you can probably be directed to that site.
Thank you. And it looks like we have another question from a clinician. Christina, I'll send this your way. So how do you feel clinicians should address the area of concern of increased suicidal ideation attempts since COVID? It's like the big question I think that you addressed probably last month, but what are the main focuses that a clinician should look for in addressing what's happening during these restrictions?
Yes, very big question, very important question. I just want to say first, the CDC has not released mortality data for 2020. So we can't say for certain that there's an increased number of deaths due to suicide, at least nationally. But the CDC has found that since the pandemic, more adults, ethnic minority groups, military personnel, and essential workers are reporting more thoughts of suicide. So, and given what is happening, it would make sense that we're all concerned. And so you want to, parent or clinician, just to check in with your young person, your child, just to see how it's been affecting them, and ask directly, in a way that is appropriate for their age, if they are having thoughts of suicide, if you're starting to be concerned, because it makes given all that's happening and that we know, it makes sense to have that question. And just, it's really important to have open, honest conversations about suicide. Asking about suicide will not increase the likelihood that a person will think, or a young person will think about suicide. Just be prepared for how to respond. So if they do disclose thoughts of suicide, you want to assess, complete a safety plan. There are different safety plans you can search, again, with a Google search, actually. And this is a really great way just to really invite the youth to talk. If you're a guardian, if you're a parent, you want to be part of that safety plan. And if they do disclose thoughts, again, just continue to evaluate their risk every time you see them. And if you're a clinician, change your treatment plan to prioritize suicide risk if they disclose that and that comes up. If you do need support, you can contact Dee Hirsch. We have clinicians there that work with primary therapists just to address specifically suicidality. And I would also suggest for clinicians to, stay up to date on the latest strategies for addressing risk. The American Association for Suicidology is actually holding a conference coming up in April 21st to 24th. And during the conference, they talk about more ways to intervene and prevent suicide.
Thank you very much. Okay, Lori, I have a rapid fire. There's a series of questions here. They're held together by a common theme, and that's really about long-term effects. And we just had a question come through with a chat that is similar. So I may have a follow-up for you after this. So get ready. Here's the question. Here's the questions. Will there be a long-term psychological effect on our young people? How can we help them come to terms that this is only a temporary phase that may pass like others? What's the most important coping strategies one could use to help lessen the negative impact on these young people? Will the pandemic affect the social behavior of youths and how they interact in the future? So that started with, will there be a long-term psychological effect for young people? And I think that's, the crux of the question.
Yeah. Well, let me grab my crystal ball. We don't know yet. We're still in this pandemic. And that's a real fear for all of us with what are going to be the after effects of this once we do get out on the other side. I think like most things, it's really depends on the child and the protective factors that child or that family has. So I think obviously we're all concerned about how this impacts ourselves individually and the children we care for. I think looking at what protective factors children have, what supports they have in their lives, what strengths. I'm a big advocate of strengths-based. So looking at your child or your client's strengths and helping them build upon that. What I've learned over my 20 years of working with kids is that they're really resilient, surprisingly so. I mean, most of the students I work with have serious trauma histories, and yet they persevere and thrive. So I think us as adults are a little less resilient. So if we can help and just have a little confidence in our students that they're going to be able to get through this. And I think a lot of how we can support them through that is reframing the experience. Whether it's news or our own personal fears or our conversations with others, we're focusing a lot, rightfully so, on the negative aspects of this time this past year. And there certainly have been many. But our students have learned a lot. And there's a lot of positive benefits. I mean, some of you mentioned earlier the silver linings. There are silver linings to this. And so looking at individual children and teens and looking at what those silver linings were for them, helping them reframe this. This is not just a lost year. Our students have learned many things. I mean, most of them have significantly improved their ability to navigate technology. We've learned new skills. Emphasize those. We've spent for hopefully most of us, more positive and time with our families. Students have found resourceful ways to get schoolwork done with adversity, to to still connect with friends. So I think helping students reframe what they've been able to accomplish in this past year is really important to their long-term mental health. So I really encourage you to look for ways that your child is doing well, even if it's just that they got up in the morning to go to school, or that they got dressed, or whatever it is, and point those out. The more we help children and teens recognize their strengths, the healthier they're going to be long term.
Let me ask you this follow-up that came from the chat. And Christina and Cheryl, if you want to jump in on this as well. So it says, planning for more hopeful days. What mental health challenges can we foresee when life returns to, quote, normal and kids return to school? What do we think that adjustment might look like?
I could see, depending on children's separation anxiety after children who've been home, especially with younger children, I could see social issues, being away from friends and peer groups, and maybe friendships have shifted. Overwhelm to the change of going back to in-person instruction, and having more choices. Those are some of the negative, but I also can see some positive, that students are going to be well rested. You know, I think a lot what I'm seeing in the news and what I know we're doing at the Help Group and other educational agencies are really looking at the mental health of kids for the first time, really hearing a lot about it, even with regular education students. So, you know, maybe the silver lining of all of this for our educational systems are that we're really paying attention to youth mental health in a way that we haven't in the past. So I know when we're talking about transitioning back, we're really thinking about how to ease these students back in, so the transition is as smooth as possible. I know, Cheryl, Christina, what thoughts you have?
I agree with everything you said, and I kind of like to piggyback on the positives. I also think that it's going to create more room for schools and administrators in these schools to really allow for curriculums to address mental health, to talk about it, and even kind of remove the stigma around it, because unfortunately there's still a stigma, right? And a lot of times these are not things that we freely talk about, but I'm hopeful that schools will look at it more, closely, as Lori mentioned, and will make room for these things. And also, too, I think it's about, like Lori said, strengths and creating safety for them, just letting them know that, you know, we're all working, adults are all working really hard to make sure that things are going to be as safe as possible, and really giving them room to kind of process that. And being patient with them, because they are going to have a lot of those big feelings, right? The separation, the anxiety, and just being really patient with them and patient with yourselves. And I want to add to another positive is there won't be as much screen time, I'm hoping, right? Because right now there's a lot of screen time. So I'm hopeful that it's going to be good for kids to go back.
So Lori, someone on chat just asked, in the last webcast, you mentioned a wellness survey that you did with the students. The attendee is wondering if you have any sample questions. I think just to sort of maybe get a sense of what were you really trying to find, what were you really looking at here?
Sure. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the question specifically, but what we did do is we looked at all areas of health. So we looked at social, educational, spiritual. So we asked questions like, you know, do you feel that your spiritual needs are being met? Do you have enough food to eat? Are you worried about your finances? Do you feel like your child is getting their educational needs met? Because we interviewed kids in the survey and also their parents. So we really made sure it was kind of a broad sweep. We had formal questionnaires, but we did this agency-wide, but on our specific campus, because we're a smaller campus, and our therapists work really closely with our students, a lot of them just had phone conversations with the parents, and they branched into different areas. And the survey kind of broke the ice to talk about things that maybe you wouldn't normally talk about with your child's school. So I hope that helps.
Sounds like a very holistic view that you were trying to get of the needs that families had.
Definitely.
Okay, so moving back to questions that we got from the last webcast. Cheryl, we look to you to be the expert about younger kids. So this question says, what kinds of questions can I ask my 8 and 6-year-old to check in on their mental health during these times? What specific question or words might resonate with them so that I know that they understand what it is I'm actually asking?
Yeah. I'm not really sure I would directly ask questions. Children at these ages really tend to look to adults for more safety and cues on how to respond to stress in their environment. And they may not necessarily know the answers to why they're feeling certain ways or what directly is impacting them. However, some of the things I think that parents could do, or even providers, when they're meeting with children, is modeling discussions of these things. So, for example, being able to say, I'm feeling a little sad today. I miss being able to go on vacation. I miss being able to see my friends. And then using those moments to kind of check in on them, wondering, like, I wonder if you feel this way. What can we do? And really using the day to normalize and validate these feelings that they're having. You can even say things like, it's been a really hard day today. And I wonder if you're feeling the same way, if it's been hard for you. I've noticed, you've been a little more tearful today, and acknowledging that you're seeing them. And really just using playtime to kind of help create this space for them in which to kind of play out and act out what they could be feeling, what they could be experiencing. And it doesn't even have to be anything direct, like, what is your doll feeling, or what is going on here with the doll? You could even kind of take 2 animals or 2 dolls and kind of play out, wondering out loud, I wonder how Mr. Elephant is feeling right now. I think he gets mad sometimes because he wishes he could go to school. He wishes he could play with his friends. What do you think? And then just kind of wait and see what the child responds. They might not respond to anything, and that's okay. You just keep trying. And you can even follow up with something like, it's okay to have these mad feelings. I wonder what things Mr. Elephant can do to help himself with these big feelings. And then just using different ideas, having different things in your home, such as bubbles, creating art together, going outside for like running breaks, teaching your children to really ask for what they might need. Maybe they need a calm space. Maybe they need to be alone, and that's okay. Maybe they need a hug, right? So I think that's the way I would kind of, go about maybe figuring out what might be happening and going through their mind. But I don't know if I would necessarily ask direct questions. I'm not sure if the other colleagues want to add to this.
I think that was great, Cheryl. I think letting the child kind of lead you where they want to go is the best approach.
So Jason just got kicked off, but he's coming right back. We're going to just move on. Christina, I have a question for you. What is the best way to address or explain isolation while continuing to advocate for safety?
Yes. So definitely, I would say for if they are, so this is Jason back. So the best way to address isolation while continue to advocate for safety, I would say that, I would recommend that modeling safety behavior, like, praising their safety behavior, like washing hands, things like that. Another tool that I haven't used, but because I'm not working with young people right now, or little young people, but I found, and I would suggest using books maybe to help kids cope with that, there's a book called from the APA called A Kid's Guide to the Coronavirus. Another one is called Unstuck, 10 Things to Do to Stay Safe and Sane During the Pandemic. And this kind of goes off Cheryl's suggestion about talking to young people about the pandemic. And, you can use story time to invite them to talk about how they're feeling and how they're feeling with isolation. And also you can use this opportunity to talk about the upcoming transition and what that's going to feel like, and what maybe they might be worried about that big change. I hope that answers that question. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think Jason might still be having some internet connection issues, so I'm going to move on to the next question that we received, and this one's going to go to Lori. Lori, as professionals, this is coming from, I think, someone that's a clinician, what suggestions would you provide to parents, children, or school staff to better support students during this pandemic?
Some of this I already mentioned. I think, first of all, listen more, talk less. I think if you have like those moments I mentioned before, just to hang out with students, whether that's in a school environment or a home environment, that's when the conversations happen. I know the conversations tend to happen when you're in the car driving somewhere, things like that. So don't miss those as opportunities to really hear what kids are needing and worried about. And then, like I said before, focus on strengths. I think you listen to their concerns, offer support, but continue to point out their strengths, I think, are helpful. I think when we start getting back to school and things start changing and the world starts opening up a little more again, offering choices depending on ages, some students may feel overwhelmed. So, would you like to do this or that? Would you like to, you're feeling upset. Would you like to go for a walk, or would you like to listen to music? Do you want to talk, or do you want to be left alone? Just kind of offering them guidance to self-soothe, really. And then I talked about this a lot last month, and I can't reiterate it enough, is you've got to take care of yourself first. Because, if we forget that we're going through all these emotions and changes that the youth we work and live with are, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to be any assistance. A lot of what we're looking at as professionals getting back is how do we make sure we're okay, so we really can have the best opportunity to support our students, because kids are great at reading the people in their lives. They know when we're upset. They know when we're overwhelmed. So if we can keep ourselves as calm and mindful as possible, then we're going to not only, like Cheryl mentioned earlier, be modeling the kind of responses we hope for our kids to have, but we're also going to be able to not only hear what they're saying, have the presence to listen to them, but then also to support them going forward.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Erica, for having my back. What a great example of what we deal with during the restriction, right? That we can lean on colleagues to help us when we get kicked off. So I appreciate that very much. Hopefully that will be the last time. I love this next question. So whoever sent this to us last time, thank you so much. Cheryl, this is coming to you. What are the appropriate steps in ensuring that our children in the Black and Brown community get the services that they need?
Yeah, I really love this question, and it's so important. I think it requires a webcast all on its own. There's a lot of information to be shared on this, but I think I would say an important place where we could start is education, and really education to help address the stigma, as I had previously mentioned, that mental health still has in these communities. Being able to create these spaces where we can openly talk about this in education settings, workplaces, religious and spiritual institutions. Also fomenting trust within these communities and providing resources directly to them and being available to answer questions honestly, and, you know, being knowledgeable about the resources around us so that we could provide proper linkage. We can do this by partnering with other organizations that are already in the community, that have already kind of established this trust with the community members. I'm thinking like, you know, certain clubs, health centers, different types of, you know, centers for children, like I mentioned, churches, religious institutions, schools especially, right? And really, too, being able to provide easier access to these communities. Oftentimes, it's very difficult for them to access services. It requires maybe transportation. It requires having to navigate different things that maybe they're not able to. And I want to say, if you really want to reach the children, we really need to start with the adult caregivers, because they're the ones that are going to be not only sharing positive messages about mental health, but they're going to be the ones supporting their child and being able to access these services. And well, where do we begin with that? As I mentioned, it's really education and breaking down stigmas and creating trust. And I think for providers, we really need to look at how we create safe spaces and open spaces to address issues that are impacting these communities, issues such as racism, implicit bias, privilege, and looking at how all these things intersect and having honest conversations about it as well. Because really the community, you know, the EIPOC community really needs to be able to trust organizations and providers, and they need to feel safe and welcome. So I think that one thing, you know, providers can do is look at other organizations that are already providing a lot of these resources to be able to accomplish these things. There's two really good ones that I have that I can share with you. And again, we'll put these up in the resource list, but there's a foundation called Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. And their mission is really to educate and eradicate the stigma of mental health, especially in the Black community. They have really great resources for organizations on their website as well. And then there's another website called Counter Tools, and they also have a lot of resources that specifically address and support mental health in the BIPOC communities. So again, I hope this was helpful. Like I said, this is a topic that we can definitely go into depth more, but we only have about 12 more minutes, so.
Well, what a great answer, Cheryl. I appreciate that and acknowledge that this is certainly a much bigger topic than the 3 minutes you were able to treat with it just then. But thank you very much. I'm going to shift back to the chat. Christina, this is a surprise question coming your way, but this seems very similar to something that you would receive at D.D. Hirsch. So it says, my youngest son is a freshman in college online and is living at home due to COVID. It's obvious to my husband and I that he's experiencing depression due to a lack of socializing. He does not want to talk about it. What are some methods to draw him out so we can address his needs due to this isolation?
Yeah, great question. Isolation will, is kicking everyone in the butt. It's really impacting their mental health. So one thing that I would suggest is for parents to be honest and open, and I'm sure you have already done this, but to talk about just how isolation really does affect mental health, having those open conversations about that and addressing that, and just say, it's hurting me. It's hurting a lot of people, and I love you and I care about you. And I'm noticing I'm wondering if it's hurting you too. And if you are worried that your child is having thoughts of suicide, you're worried for their safety, bring that up. Just like depression is very different than just feeling sad or just feeling lonely. And say depression is, it's serious and you're really concerned. And a lot of people with depression, especially if they've depression, it's very common to have thoughts of suicide. So I'd always want to check in with, that's like my first thing, obviously working at a suicide prevention center. I'm kind of thinking, let me ask about suicide, ask where they're at, normalize it. And similar to what Cheryl's saying, just like be very, very present and listen, give that space to give yourself, ground yourself to be calm and listen to his pain, open it up, hold off the solutions, hold off trying to put a Band-Aid on the pain and say, why did you, how about you do this, go out with friends, that might be the urge to try to fix the isolation. I would start with what has it been like for you? Tell me more and really invite that. And then if they do seem open to change or suggestions, for help, you could say, these are things that a lot of people have found helpful to isolation. If people have found, reaching out to friends or supports, call me anytime, I'm available. If you are having thoughts of suicide, here's the crisis line. Or if you just need to talk to someone, you could say, here's the crisis line. And it's hard to know what the steps are to support someone without having really understanding where they're at in their headspace. So just encourage open communication.
Christina, I loved what you said last month when we were talking, because I think with the families we work with, there's a lot of resistance to talking about suicide directly. And I loved how you said, you can ask whether someone's thinking about hurting themselves or killing themselves directly, and that's not going to put thoughts. And I think that, we see a lot of reluctance for parents to talk about that. But I loved what you said before about that, because I think it's important to be able to talk about it kind of fearlessly.
Yes. And kids if they are having thoughts of suicide, they want to talk to most of the time I hear they're like, I would like to, I am afraid of how they're going to react if I tell them, or I don't want to upset them. Kids worry about their parents too, and they want to protect them. And so they won't tell. But if you just are very confident and calm and just matter of fact about it, they'll respond.
And I love this question too. Lori, I'll throw this to you, but Cheryl and Christina, if you want to jump in, what are some of the impacts of the pandemic specifically on the LGBTQ plus students? And how can educators in the community help support our LGBTQ youth during this time and during the aftermath of the COVID crisis?
Mm-hmm. Some of the impacts that I've seen and heard about and read about is that, a lot of that LGBTQIA community is not necessarily out to their families, or families may not be supportive to them. So while all of us have struggled with being in confinement and being isolated, for these communities, it can be really isolating because they can't reach the supports they used to have. Maybe video conferencing or talking on the phone is not a safe option, or they're not comfortable talking about the concerns that they typically would talk about at school or in community programs or with their therapist. So the lack of privacy is even more magnified for these populations. The good news is technology. I know we always tend to get a little frustrated with technology, but the good news is that technology has kind of really been an asset for these communities. And there's been a lot of the social service agencies that work with the LGBTQ plus communities now have texting programs, because that's a lot safer, quieter way to discuss. Locally here, we have the Los Angeles LGBT Center, but there are national centers across all the states. I know last time we had quite an international crowd, but you can find a center, and they've developed things to protect privacy for these people who are isolated at home. The Trevor Project for LGBT people who are in crisis, PFLAG, which is also a national organization. So there is support for this community because this is an isolating time when their typical relationships and supports have been kind of ripped away from them. Also, in the help group agency, we have the Kaleidoscope program, and they have groups and supports for students age 12 to 18, but also have other groups and supports for our young adults for 18 to 24, I believe. So, like keep mentioning, we'll include these resources in our list. Cheryl, Christina, do you have anything to add? It's a big.
I think you made great points. And I really do like that the texting, that it's definitely a safe way for this population to have some kind of support. It's definitely, it's tough. I think you covered everything.
Great. Fantastic. I think we have time for one last question before we wrap up. I can't believe how time has really flown here. Maybe that happens when you get kicked off. But I'm gonna come back to you, Christina. And this question is kind of a targeted question, but I think you can answer it a little bit more broadly than this. And I think it sort of takes us full circle here. The question was, are there teenage peer support groups that are available to teenagers who are contemplating suicide? But let's broaden that to say, what are the resources out there? I think we've been over some of these before, but this is a great way to end. What are the resources out there for teens who are really, really struggling right now, who may be contemplating suicide? How can parents look for support within the community that we live in?
Yes, that's a great question. There are definitely support groups out there for teens. I really could start listing them. I would just say for general, for young people, I don't think they're for teens though, but there's in terms of support groups, there's the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. And keep in mind, a lot of support groups are being offered online right now, so you can access those. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, they have support groups for peers and for caregivers, family members. There's, if they're having thoughts of suicide, there's the 12-step Suicide Anonymous online support group. I would also say that in terms of helping specifically the teens with thoughts of suicide, I would say I would recommend DBT, so dialectical behavior therapy. And DBT is a type of CBT. It combines that group therapy with one-on-one coaching sessions, and that has been repeatedly found to reduce the risk for suicide and self-harm in teens. I wouldn't. There some we've gotten a question about are there teen support groups with teens that have peers facilitating the group? We wouldn't recommend that, but we would recommend DBT because they'll create a safe place where teens can support each other. They learn a lot of skills, distress tolerance skills I mentioned earlier, emotion regulation skills, things that reduce suicide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Christina. We've come to the end of the time today. I can't thank Dr. Christina Ortiz, Cheryl Hueso-Meshak, and Lori Owens enough for agreeing to come back and do this for us another month. I knew the questions I was going to ask. I still feel like I learned a lot. It was great to respond to some of the questions that we were getting live in the chat. And then, you know, those you guys are taking cold, and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you again for joining us and sharing your expertise with us this morning. This presentation has been recorded, and we will let you know when it is available to view and share with your colleagues and friends. If there are any questions that we were not able to get to today, please go ahead and send them to us, and we will try to follow up with an email to answer any of those questions. We invite you to join us on Monday, March 15th. That's this upcoming Monday at 10 a.m. for an open house that we are hosting to present all of the schools that we operate to you. And you may sign up for that open house by going to thg-openhouse.eventbrite.com. Erica, can you just put that in the chat? Because that's hard for me to remember, and I just wrote it.
Absolutely.
I read it.
I'll do it right now.
Thank you. Also, be sure to look out for our next webcast, which is scheduled now for May 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific. It says on my notes Pacific Standard Time, but do remember we're changing our clocks on Saturday, so it's actually Pacific Daylight Time. So our next webcast will be May 12th at 10 a.m. In addition to our outreach to you, you can find more information regarding the open house and our next webcast on the Help Group's website. While there may be light at the end of the tunnel, these certainly remain challenging times, and we all look forward to the day when our students are back learning on their school campuses. In the meantime, this is a time to focus on giving every student a quality education. At the Help Group, we endeavor to provide that to our students and to impart what we have learned to parents, other schools, and other communities. If you'd like to learn more about our schools and programs within or outside the Los Angeles area, you may go to our website at www.thehelpgroup.org, email our admissions department at admissions@thehelpgroup.org, or give us a call at 877-943-5747. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your choosing to spend your valuable time with us today. We at the Help Group are here for you when you need us. We wish you safety and health, and we hope that better days full of friends, families, and colleagues are in our near future.